They told me my son would come home, and I did not believe them. Not because I thought they were lying, because I had stopped believing the world owed our village anything at all. We are called Brindle Hollow, and you will not find us on the good maps. We are 11 days hard road from the capital if the weather holds, and you change horses where you can, and the weather does not hold, and there is nowhere to change horses for the last 3. We are a scatter of gray stone houses on the shoulder of a mountain the king has never seen, in a kingdom whose name our boys learn to be proud of before they learn it is a place that will never once send anyone to look at us. We grow oats and we cut peat and we bury our own. When the recruiting officer comes through in the spring, walking his fine horse up our one street, he does not stop. He has never needed to stop. The boys come down the hill to him. My son Aldous went down the hill to him 4 years ago, and I stood in the door of this house and watched him go, and I did not call him back, because a mother who calls a boy back from the only honorable road out of a place like this has done him no kindness. He turned once at the bend by the well and lifted his hand. He was 17. He had a way of grinning that started on one side of his face before the other side caught up. I can still see it. I will always be able to see it. That is the one mercy and the one cruelty of it both, that I will always be able to see it. So when the letter came in the autumn of the 4th year, carried up the last 3 roadless miles by a boy from the lower valley who had been paid a coin to bring it, and who would not meet my eyes, I knew before I broke the seal. A mother knows. The wax was black. I sat down on the step of this house where I had watched him go, and I read that Corporal Aldous Bren of the line had fallen in service of the crown in a place I had never heard of and would never see, and that the king's household sent its sorrow. The king's household sent its sorrow. I read that line 4 times, and then I folded the letter very small and I thought, that is all then. That is what the road carries up to Brindle Hollow. 3 lines of another man's handwriting, and a word sorrow that cost the man who wrote it nothing, and that would now cost me everything for the rest of my life. My boy was dead in the mud at the far end of the kingdom, and they would put him in the ground there, among strangers, in soil he had never walked until the week it took him, and I would never stand over him. I would grow old looking down a road that would bring me nothing. That is what happens to the sons of Brindle Hollow. They go down the hill, and the hill keeps them. I did not cry that first night. I want to be honest about that because what came after only means what it means if I am honest about the start. I did not cry. I was past it. I sat in the dark with the letter in my apron, and I felt the largest part of me simply close. The way a house closes for the winter, the shutters in and the fire banked low, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, asking for nothing. Because asking is how the world finds the soft place to hurt you. And then, 11 days later, a man came up the road. I heard him before I saw him, and I heard him wrong. I heard the slow steps of a horse being led, not ridden, led, and the heavier sound of something behind it, wheels finding the ruts of a road that was barely a road. I thought it was the carter from the lower valley, come at the wrong time of year. I came to my door wiping my hands, and I looked down the street to the bend by the well, and I stopped where I stood and I could not move. It was a soldier, but not a soldier the way our recruiting officer was a soldier, in his good plain riding coat. This man was in the full dress of the king's own household guard, the dress we had only ever seen in a single painted card the schoolmaster kept and showed the children, a coat of deep red wool, near black in the failing light, with buttons that caught what little sun was left and threw it back, and white gloves, and a tall black helm of dark fur, and at his side the long ceremonial sword. He was leading a black horse by its bridle, and the horse was drawing a low cart, and on the cart, raised up on a bier and covered over with a great flag of the crown, was a coffin. He had walked it. I understood that all at once, the way you understand a thing your mind has refused until it cannot refuse it any longer. He had not ridden. The road up to us cannot be ridden for the last miles. It is too broken, and so for the last miles a man who wished to could have unhitched the horse and ridden it and let a hired carter bring the cart up slow behind. This man had not done that. This man was walking on his own 2 feet, in the full dress that is made for standing still in a palace forecourt, and not for 11 days on a mountain road, leading the horse that drew my son. He came up the street at the pace of a slow march. Not a walk, a march, the measured ceremonial step, each foot set down with care, as though the cobbles of Brindle Hollow were the marble of the throne room and the whole court of the kingdom were watching from the windows of our broken-down houses. There was no court. There were old Hesse, come out onto her step with her hand over her mouth, the smith's 2 children stopped dead in the road with their hoops forgotten, the schoolmaster halfway out his door, and me. That was the whole of the watching world. And he marched for us as though we were the world. He brought the horse to a halt before my door. He did not look at me yet. He looked first to the coffin, and he made certain the cart had come to a true stop and the bier had not shifted, and only then did he turn and face me, and he came to attention. I knew the word later. Then I only saw it, the whole length of a tired man snapping straight and still as a held breath, and he raised his white-gloved hand to the brim of that tall dark helm in a salute, and he held it. "Mistress Bren," he said, his voice was wrecked with the road, hoarse and low, "I have brought your son home." I did not understand. I think I said something foolish. I think I said home, as though it were a word in another language, because it was. In Brindle Hollow it was. We did not have a word for our son's coming home. We had only ever had the other one. "Corporal Aldous Bren," he said, and his hand was still at the salute, and it did not waver, though I could see now how the man swayed on his feet with the weariness of where he had come from. Of the line, "He has come home to you, mistress, and to his own ground with every honor the crown can render him. I am sorry it took me so long to climb your hill." He had walked 11 days up a mountain in his dress reds leading my dead boy, and what he said to me, the first thing he said to me, was that he was sorry it had taken him so long. That was the man the king sent. I did not know his name yet. I learned it slowly over the days that came, partly from him in the few words he would give about himself, partly from the young soldier who had stayed for the burying, partly from what I worked out for myself, lying awake. I am going to tell it the way I came to understand it, because it deserves to be understood whole. My son had a long road home. This is the road, and this is the man who would not let 1 mile of it be made cheaply. His name was Sergeant Maddox Crane. I learned later, the young soldier told me, by the fire, the night before we put Aldous in the ground, that it had not been Sergeant Crane's duty to come at all. The fallen of the line, when they fall far from home, are not each one of them carried personally up a mountain by a man of the king's household. There are not enough men of the king's household, and there are too many fallen, and a kingdom that tried to do it for every son would do it for none. What is done, what is right, and ordinary and not unkind, is that the fallen are brought together to the nearest town with a proper road, with reverence in a wagon, and there the families are sent to fetch them, or a local man is paid to make the last short carriage to the family's door. For Aldous there was no family who could be sent to fetch him. I am old, and his father is 12 years dead, and he had no brothers. He had only me. 11 days up a road I could not have walked down and back in a season, with no horse and no coin to hire one. And there was no town near us with a proper road. The nearest town with a proper road is the lower valley, and from the lower valley to Brindle Hollow is the 3 roadless miles and a deal more besides. And the man who would ordinarily have been paid to make that last carriage, the carter from the lower valley, had taken one look at the season and the sky and the state of the mountain track, and named a price the household clerk could not pay out of the small purse set aside for such things, and had then said, when pressed, that he would not do it at any price with winter coming on, that no sensible man would, that the body could lie in the lower valley's cold house until spring and the family be told to come for it then. The body could lie until spring. My son could lie in a stranger's cold house through the long dark, 4 months, unburied, unwatched, while his mother sat 11 days off not even knowing he had got that far, and it would have been nobody's fault. That is the thing I have had to make my peace with. Every man in the chain would have done the ordinary correct thing. The clerk would have closed the purse correctly. The carter would have refused correctly. And that is how the far sons of poor villages are lost, not by cruelty, but by everyone all down the line doing the ordinary correct thing. Sergeant Crane was not in that chain at all. He was a guardsman of the household, posted to the very gate of the palace, a man whose whole work was to stand. He happened to be in the receiving hall the morning the clerk and the carter had their quiet, correct conversation about the purse and the season, because he had come to render the salute of the gate to the fallen as they were carried in. That is a thing the household does, a courtesy, the standing of an honor watch over the coffins as they come through. He was standing his honor watch over the line of them when he heard the carter say the word spring. The young soldier told me Sergeant Crane did not say anything for a moment. He stood his watch out, and then he asked the clerk quietly which of the fallen it was that would lie until spring, and the clerk showed him the slip, and the slip said, Corporal Aldous Bren, Brindle Hollow, no family able to attend. The young soldier said Sergeant Crane read the slip twice, the way I had read my letter 4 times, and then he said, and the young soldier swore to me these were the words, no, not this one. This one goes home. It was not a simple thing to make happen. It is one thing for a man to feel his heart move. It is another to make the world move with it, and the world does not like to climb mountains for the sons of poor villages. A guardsman of the gate does not simply ask for leave. The post must be covered, and the asking goes up through men who are very busy and who would, most of them, have said no, not unkindly, but because the rule is the rule, and a sergeant of the gate is needed at the gate. He went to his captain. The young soldier had this part from a friend in the orderly room, and I believe it. The captain heard him out, and the captain, who was not a cruel man, only a correct one, said what the rule said, which was that the household could not spare a serving sergeant for the better part of a month to carry one fallen corporal up a road no wagon would take, when the established and proper course was that the fallen wait in the lower valley until they could be decently fetched. And Sergeant Crane is reported to have stood at attention before his captain and said only this, Sir, he went down a hill to us when he was 17, from a place that has never once been sent a man to look at it. He stood his watches for the crown for 4 years, and he fell standing them. The crown asks every boy in every far village to believe that he matters to it. I am asking the crown to be telling the truth about that for the space of 11 days. If I am wrong that it is worth a sergeant's month, then the whole thing we tell those boys is a lie, and I would rather know it. The captain looked at him a long moment, the young soldier said, and then the captain stood up, and the captain, who could have simply granted it quietly and let it be a small kindness done in a corner, did something else instead. He said the sergeant was right, and that if the thing was right it should be done in the open and properly, not smuggled. He took it himself to the controller of the household, and the controller took it to a man higher than himself, and somewhere up that chain, I do not know how high. The young soldier did not know either, and Sergeant Crane would never say, somewhere up that chain a man with the authority to do it wrote an order. The order was that Corporal Aldous Bren of Brindle Hollow was to be carried to his own door with the full escort honors of the household, by Sergeant Maddox Crane in dress, and that the household would bear the cost of the road, and that the sergeant's post would be covered for as long as it took him to climb the hill and come back down. They gave him the dress reds to do it in. That mattered. He could have done it in a riding coat. It would have been more sensible, warmer, easier on 11 days of mountain. They gave him the dress, the deep red wool and the white gloves and the tall dark helm, the uniform a man wears to stand in front of the king, and they sent him up a mountain in it to stand in front of me. Because the dress is the kingdom saying, this is not an errand. This is an honor. And Sergeant Crane meant my son to have the full one every mile, whether anyone was watching or not. I have come to think this is the whole of what he taught me, though he never said a teaching word in his life, that an honor you only render when someone important is watching is not an honor at all. It is a performance. The thing only becomes real on the empty road, where no one will ever know whether you did it right. And the road was empty, and no one would ever have known. He took the coffin out of the Capitol with a proper escort, a small mounted party of the household, the young soldier among them, walking the first good roads at the slow march. And that part, near the city, had people in it. Townsfolk who stopped and bared their heads as the crown's colors went by, because near the city people are used to the household, and they know what the red coat over a coffin means. For 3 days the road was good and there were people to see, and Sergeant Crane marched it exactly as he would later march my empty mountain street, with the same care. And at the time the young soldier thought nothing of it, because of course you march well when the towns are watching. It was on the 4th day that he understood the sergeant, the young soldier told me, and it was the 4th day that I came to love a man I had never met. On the 4th day the good road gave out. The escort party was to turn back there, that was the order, the household escort only to the edge of the proper roads, and from there a hired carriage onward with the sergeant alone, the established correct course. The other riders made their farewells to the fallen and turned their horses for home. And the hired carriage that was to take the coffin onward through the rough country did not come, because the carrier had heard about the mountain and the season and had thought better of it, the same as the Lower Valley carter would think better of it a week later. They all think better of it, all down the line, every correct man. And there was Sergeant Crane at the edge of the good roads with a coffin and a borrowed black horse and a low cart, and 7 days of broken country still to climb, alone, and no carriage coming. And full leave to do the correct thing and wait. The young soldier had not yet turned his own horse. He told me he watched the sergeant stand a moment at the edge of the metalled road, looking up the rough track into the hills, and then the sergeant unhitched nothing and rode nothing and waited for nothing. He took the black horse's bridle in his white-gloved hand, and he set his foot on the rough road, and he began to walk, at the slow march, leading my son up into the empty hills where there was not one living soul to see whether he marched or slouched, whether he carried the honor or set it down in the ditch and dragged the cart up anyhow, the way any reasonable tired man alone on an empty road would. The young soldier said he sat his horse and watched the red coat go up the track and grow small, marching, and that he could not make himself turn for home. He was a Lower Valley boy himself. He knew the rough country. He knew what 7 days of it alone would be. So he disobeyed his own orders. He laughs about it now, a little the way a man laughs at the best thing he ever did, and he turned his horse and rode after the sergeant and said he would come on, that the country needed a man who knew it, and Sergeant Crane did not order him back. That is how I came to have the young soldier by my fire to tell me all this. He went the whole road too, riding the rough stages, scouting the fords, but it was the sergeant who walked the whole way on his own feet in the dress reds, and would let no one spell him at the horse's head for more than the steepest pitches. 7 days of that. I want you to sit with 7 days of that because I have had to. 7 days of a mountain road in autumn, the cold rain that comes sideways up there, the fords running brown and high, the nights when there is no inn and no house, and a man sleeps under the cart with the rain coming through. 7 days of leading a horse up grades so steep the cart had to be eased down the far sides with ropes around the trees so it would not run away and break the beer. And every morning of those 7 days, the young soldier told me, the first thing Sergeant Crane did before he ate, before he warmed his hands, was to lift the edge of the crown's flag and look that the coffin had not shifted in the night and the colors lay true, and to set his white gloves, washed out each night in the cold streams and never once let go gray, however it cost him, and to straighten himself into the dress, and to take the bridle, and to march. There was a ford on the 5th day, the young soldier said, where it nearly ended. The water had come up overnight and the brown river was over the stones of the crossing and running hard, and the sensible thing, there is always a sensible thing, was to wait a day for it to drop. But a day was a day, And somewhere up a mountain, a mother did not yet know her son had even left the capital. And the sergeant looked at the water a long while, and then said they would cross. They took the cart over by hand, the sergeant in the river to his chest in the killing cold, both gloved hands under the bier holding the coffin level and dry above the flood, while the young soldier led the horse and hauled. The sergeant went under once. A foot slipped on a stone and the river had him for a heartbeat. And the thing the young soldier could not stop telling me about was that, with the river taking him, Sergeant Crane did not let go of the bier to save himself. He kept the coffin up and dry and level with the strength of both arms while his own head went under the brown water, and he got his feet again somehow and came up gasping, and never once let the box of my son dip toward the flood. He would have drowned before he let Aldous get wet. I asked the young soldier that night by my fire why man would do that, risk his own life to keep a dead stranger's coffin out of a river when the dead feel no cold and no wet and would never know. And the young soldier was quiet a while, and then he said the sergeant had told him something at that ford, sitting on the far bank afterward soaked to the bone and shaking, the only time in the whole road he said anything like it. The sergeant had said, "It is not for him that it has to be done right. He is past caring, God keep him. It is for her. There is a woman up this mountain who is going to spend the rest of her life with one picture of how her son came back to her. I will not have that picture be of a wet box dragged up out of a ditch. I will give her a picture she can live inside. A picture I can live inside." He did not know me. He had never seen my face. And he went into a flooded river for a picture I could live inside. They came down at last out of the high country into the lower valley on the 9th day, and it was in the lower valley that Sergeant Crane met the carter. The very carter who, 10 days before in the capital, had named a price no purse could pay, and then refused at any price, and who had sent the message up the chain that the body should lie until spring. I have wondered whether the sergeant knew the man's name before he reached the valley, or whether he only worked it out when he got there. The young soldier did not know, but he was there for what passed between them, and he told it carefully, because he said it was the only time on the whole road he saw the sergeant come close to anger, and that even his anger was a quiet and terrible thing, more terrible than shouting. The lower valley has the cold house, the stone shed where the dead wait, and it was to the cold house that the established correct course had meant Aldous to come and wait until spring. The sergeant did not take him there. He brought the cart to a halt in the valley's one square, before the inn, in the gray afternoon, and a small crowd gathered the way a crowd gathers around the crown's colors even in a poor place, and among them came the carter, who knew very well what the coffin was and whose it was, because it had been his refusal that named it. The carter, the young soldier said, was not an evil man. I want that set down. He was a frightened man, and frightened men are harder to forgive than wicked ones because they have a reason, and the reason is themselves. He came up to the sergeant half blustering and half ashamed, and he said the road up to Brindle Hollow could not be made this season, that no cart could climb the last miles with winter coming, that the only sense was to put the corporal in the cold house, and tell the old woman to come down for him in the spring. He said it loudly, for the crowd, the way a man does when he is really arguing with his own conscience and hoping the crowd will side with it against him. And Sergeant Crane, who had walked 9 days, who had been under a river, whose dress reds were stained dark with the road and whose white gloves he had scrubbed in cold streams every night to keep clean, Sergeant Crane turned and looked at the carter, and the young soldier said the square went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something is about to be decided. The sergeant did not raise his hand. He did not raise his voice. He said, "You are the man who said spring." The carter started to bluster again, and the sergeant let him run down, and then the sergeant said, "I have heard your reasons. They are good reasons. They are the same good reasons a clerk had, and a captain nearly had, and a carrier had at the edge of the metalled road, and every reasonable man between here and the capital has had. Every one of them was correct. And if I had listened to a single one of them, this man would be in a box on a shelf in your cold house tonight, and his mother would be sitting up a mountain not knowing whether her son was even in the kingdom, and in the spring, you would have carried him up cheap and quick to a woman whose heart had already broken twice, once for his death and once for his absence, and you would have called it mercy. You would all have called it mercy. The doing of nothing, by reasonable men, is what passes for mercy to the far villages. I have come 9 days to find out whether the kingdom meant what it says to the boys it takes off the hills, and I am telling you it is going to mean it the last 3 miles too, with you or around you. Now, do you know the road up or do you not? The carter, the young soldier said, stood a long moment, and then the bluster went out of him all at once, the way air goes out of a thing, and his face changed, and he said quietly, so the crowd had to lean to hear it, that he knew the road. He had been born up that valley. He knew every rut of it, and he said he would take them up himself with his own strong cart and his own 4 horses that could do it where the borrowed black could not, and he would take not 1 coin for it. And he did. The man who had said spring put his own shoulder to the last 3 miles and would not be paid. The sergeant led him, letting a frightened man buy back a little of himself, by carrying up the very weight he had refused. There is a kind of honor that humbles a man, and there is a kind that lifts a beaten man back onto his feet, and Sergeant Crane somehow dealt both to the carter inside 1 short minute in a valley square, and the carter went up that mountain a better man than he came down it. So it was the carter's strong cart and 4 horses that brought my son up the last roadless miles, and the borrowed black horse walked behind, and the sergeant, who could now, at last, with a strong team doing the hauling, have ridden the black up the easy way the sergeant walked. The whole last 3 miles, on his own feet at the slow march behind the cart in the dress reds, leading the black horse by the bridle, so that whatever else the road had taken from the honor, the last approach to the village, the part a mother might see, would be exactly as it should be. A guardsman of the king's household, on foot, in full dress, bringing a son home. That is what I saw when I came to my door, wiping my hands, and stopped where I stood and could not move. I did not know yet about the captain, or the river, or the carter. I only saw a red coat marching up my empty street behind my son, slow, careful, for an audience of old Hesse and 2 children and a schoolmaster and a broken woman, as though we were the court of the kingdom. And we were. He had decided we were, somewhere far back down the road, and because he marched the whole way as though it were true, it became true. Brindle Hollow, that the maps forget, was for 1 gray afternoon the most honored ground in the realm, because a man had decided to treat it so. He set the cart before my door, and he made sure of the beer, and he turned and came to attention and saluted and held it, and his ruined voice said, "Mistress Bren, I have brought your son home." And when I said home, like a word in a foreign tongue, he said he was sorry it had taken him so long to climb my hill. I do not remember crossing the ground to him. I remember my hands on the edge of the cart, on the wood of the bier my son lay on, and I remember the great flag of the crown over the coffin, the colors bright and true even in that gray light, not a thread of it soiled. He had kept the colors clean through a river and 7 days of mountain rain. Somehow, the way he kept the gloves clean, by an act of will I cannot fathom. And I remember the sergeant standing at attention beside me, swaying with weariness he would not show, while a mother put her hands on the box that held the last of her boy. And I remember that I did not break, not then. I had thought in the 11 days since the black wax letter, that if I ever did get to stand over my son I would come apart entirely, and I had been almost glad I would never have to, because a person cannot live having come entirely apart. But standing there with my hands on the wood, with that red coat at attention beside me and those clean colors over my boy, I found that I was not coming apart. I was being held. The whole careful ceremony of it, the dress, the salute, the slow march up my street, the flag lying true, it was a pair of hands under me, the way the sergeant's hands had been under the bier in the river. He had built me something to stand inside while I grieved, a structure of honor strong enough to bear my weight, and I stood inside it and it held and I did not fall. That is what the ceremony is for. I understood it then for the first time in my life. I had always half thought, the way poor practical people do, that all the marching and saluting and the bright colors were a kind of show, a thing the great put on for themselves. I understood at my own door that it is the opposite. It is a set of hands made out of discipline and care that a stranger can put under you on the worst day of your life so that you are held up and do not drown. My son went into a flooded river and a man held him level above it. I went into a flood of grief at my own door and the same man held me level above that. It was the same act. It was the same man. It was the same hands. He would not come into my house to rest that first night, not until the coffin was settled. He had my son carried in, he, and the young soldier and the carter and the smith, 4 men, slow, the colors kept over the box and laid in the front room on trestles the schoolmaster brought, and he set the flag true over it, and he asked my leave for the watch. He explained gently, his hoarse voice low, that a fallen man of the line is not left alone through the nights before his burial, that an honor watch is stood over him, and that with my permission he would stand the first of it. And so the sergeant, who had walked 11 days, who had not slept dry in a week, who was gray to the lips with exhaustion, asked my leave to stand all night in my front room over my son rather than lie down. I told him no. I told him he would lie down by my fire and sleep like the dead, and then I heard my own words and we both, for the first time, almost smiled, and did not because it was too soon. I told him I would stand the first watch. He looked at me a long moment, and then he did a thing I will keep until I die. He showed me how. He stood me at the foot of the trestles, and he set my hands, and he showed me how to hold myself, and he said that the watch was not about staying awake. It was about the watched one never being alone, and that I had stood that watch over Aldous since the night he was born, and would know how to stand it now better than any soldier in the kingdom. And then he let an old woman keep vigil over her own son in her own house, which is the last thing in the world a tired man wants to surrender, the doing of the duty, and which was therefore the truest gift he gave me, to hand the honor back to the one it most belonged to. It was that night, while I stood my watch and the sergeant slept by the fire and would not be moved, that the young soldier told me the road, the captain, the river, the carter, the picture I could live inside. He told it low so as not to wake the sergeant, who he said would be angry to hear it told, because the sergeant did not think any of it was a story. The sergeant thought it was only the correct thing, only what the kingdom had promised and must therefore pay. To him, leaving a far son in a cold house until spring was the thing that would have been beneath the kingdom, and climbing the mountain in dress reds was merely the floor, the least a realm could do and still be telling its boys the truth. The young soldier said he had served 3 years and never met another man who set the floor so high, and that he would follow him up any mountain in the world. We buried Aldous the second day, in the small walled ground above the village where his father lies, where you can see the bend by the well that he turned at and lifted his hand. The whole of Brindle Hollow came. We are not many, but we all came in our best, which is not much, and the sergeant came in his dress reds brushed and set right, the gloves white as snow. You would never have known the road was in them. And he rendered my son the full honors of the household at the graveside, every form of it, the slow march and the salute and the folding of the crown's colors into a tight bright square that he placed in my 2 hands and closed my fingers over. And here is the thing I most want told, the thing that is the whole of why I have set all this down. When the colors were folded and the words were said, and my son was in the ground beside his father, the sergeant did not only honor Aldous. He turned at the graveside to the whole of Brindle Hollow gathered there, old Hesse and the smith and the schoolmaster and the children and all of us, the forgotten village the maps lose, and he came to attention, and he saluted us. The living, the poor gray village on the shoulder of a mountain the king will never see. He held the salute to us the full count, and his wrecked voice carried across the graves, and he said that the kingdom did not forget the places its honor came from, that a realm is only as strong as its farthest, smallest, most forgotten ground, because that is the ground that gives its sons and asks for nothing. That Brindle Hollow had given a son who stood his watches faithfully unto death, and that the kingdom knew it, and that he had been sent, he, a man of the king's own gate, to say so to our faces, on our own street, so that we would know it was true and not a line in a letter. He said the king's household sent not its sorrow but its honor, and that the difference between those two words was the whole of the 11 days. I watched my neighbors hear that. I watched old Hesse straighten her bent back. I watched the smith's children look up at the red coat with their mouths open, the way I imagine my Aldous once looked up at a painted card the schoolmaster kept, and I knew that one of those children would go down the hill someday, and would go down it believing, in a way no child of Brindle Hollow had ever quite been able to believe before, that the kingdom at the bottom of the hill would remember the village at the top. Sergeant Crane gave that to us. He marched it up a mountain, and he put it in the children's eyes. He left the next morning. He would not take anything from us. We had little to give, but we offered what we had, the way you do, and he refused it all and would have walked back down with nothing, but that the carter, the good carter now, the redeemed carter, insisted on driving him down to the lower valley behind the strong horses. At my door, before he went, the sergeant came to attention one last time and saluted me, and I, who had learned a great deal in 2 days about what a salute is for, put down the folded colors and took the man's face in my 2 old hands instead, white gloves and dress reds and all, and I held his tired face the way I would have held my son's, and I told him that he had given me a picture I could live inside, and that I would live inside it the rest of my days. His composure broke, then, only for a moment, only the eyes, and he let it, and then he set it back, and he went down my hill at the slow march until the bend by the well took him from sight. I never saw him again. I am an old woman now and the years have gone, and I will not see him again on this side of the ground. But I will tell you what I have, and it is more than I ever thought to have on the night the black wax letter came, and I felt myself close like a house for winter. I have a folded square of the crown's colors on the shelf above my fire, and a grave I can stand over on the hill, where I can see the bend my boy turned at. I have a village that holds its head up, that buried its son with full honor and was honored itself, that sends its children down the hill now believing they matter. And I have the picture. I have it exactly as he meant me to have it, not of a wet box dragged up out of a ditch, not of a son lost forever among strangers in soil he never walked, but of a red coat marching slow and careful up my empty gray street in the failing light, on its own 2 tired feet, leading my son home the whole long road, every mile of it made right, all the way to my door, because one man decided that the farthest and the smallest and the most forgotten ground in the kingdom was worth the climb. They told me my son would come home, and I did not believe them. I was wrong. He came home. A man carried him 11 days up a mountain to be sure of it. And I have learned, too late to be young again, but not too late to be grateful, the one thing that man taught without ever teaching, that the measure of a kingdom, of a man, of any of us, is not the honor we render where the great are watching. It is the honor we render on the empty road, up the forgotten hill, to the small and the poor and the dead who can never thank us, when no one in the whole wide world would ever have known if we had set it down in the ditch and done the easier, reasonable, correct thing instead. He did not set it down. He carried it the whole way home. And so my son came home a prince, to the door of a house the maps forget, and his mother stood inside the honor of it and was held and did not drown,